Now more than ever, innovative technologies are fueling change and sparking new ways of thinking. Collaboration between corporations and startups is key to staying at the forefront of these trends. However, finding the right startups can be expensive, time-consuming, and ineffective. But Plug and Play is here to help. As a corporate partner, you will gain access to a whole ecosystem of innovation. Discover startups that meet your tech interests. Stay updated on the latest trends and network with industry peers. We will help you during every stage of your innovation journey, no matter where you are and where you want to go. Get in touch today.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for attending the first installment here of our monthly crypto talks. At Plug and Play, we really want to take a step. There's been a lot of noise in the marketplace, but we want to really take the time to highlight the areas that we find interest. You know, the crypto industry has decoupled into meaningful segments, each with their own value propositions and investment opportunities. And we believe speaking directly with the people building and backing these companies within these segments is the best way to get a look behind the hype and fear that dominates the current narrative. So PMP Crypto Talks is going to be a monthly webinar where we bring on incredible founders and investors for a 45-minute podcast-style discussion. So I'm joined by Kavi Dewan, and I'll let him take it here to intro today's topic, Decentralized Wireless.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you everyone for joining. So this month we'll be discussing, as you all know, Decentralized Wireless, which we think is one of the most exciting sectors within the broader crypto industry. But before we dive in and before I introduce our speakers, I want to just spend a minute to set the scene. And so firstly, telecommunications is a massive industry. And for context, the big three telcos in the US alone, that's AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon, they made $370 billion in revenue in 2021. So it's a multi-trillion-dollar industry, and it's growing very fast. In the last 2 decades, per capita demand for mobile data, that's increased by a factor of more than 300x. And you know, the growth curve is barely flattening. Access to the internet and the ability to send data is a core commodity of our time. And so that's the first thing. It's a really big industry, and it's a really important industry. And so what's the problem? Well, the problem is that today's cellular networks still have high cost and poor coverage. So I'll share a couple stats, one from outside the US and one from inside. Outside the US, you know, it's estimated 37% of the world's population, that's 2.9 billion people, still have never used the internet. And then within the US, a stat from 2021 says there was 300 million wireless carrier subscribers and an industry churn rate of 22%. That means that there were 66 million people who were unsatisfied with their wireless coverage with their carrier, and they switched. And so that's the industry, that's the problem. And now what are we doing about it? And what's the solution? Well, in recent years, there have been a few key unlocks that have led to DUI and what we're going to talk about today. One of those has been the rise of eSIMs. Another is CBRS and unlicensed spectrum. The rise of, you know, MVNOs, people like Mint Mobile, and anyone can become a telco. And what we're going to discuss today is where that's all headed. And so that being said, I'd like to introduce, you know, our 2 amazing speakers today. Alvaro Garcia, partner at Borderless Capital, and who's really spearheading their DY investments, and Andrew Fisher, the CEO of Noble Networks, which is a leading DY infrastructure company. Guys, welcome. Really excited to have you on.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Maybe,
Thank you.
yeah, maybe we could start with sort of introductions on yourselves and, you know, your journeys into DY. Alvaro, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. Thank you for having me here. So I'm Alvaro Garcia. I'm the partner for the H5 funds at Borderless. I started my career as an economist and in the audit practice at Deloitte. Then I pursued my MBA, where I founded a crypto VC fund. Then afterwards, I joined Telefonica Ventures, and I ended up being the head of US investments from our office at Menlo Park. I had exposure to all this innovation that was happening around the 5G, blockchain, cybersecurity, and cloud. And then I joined Borderless Capital, and I'm heading the H5 category of funds at Borderless Capital, We are the main fund investing in DY and DPIM, which is the broader category. And we are large shareholders at Helium, Nova Labs, and we have positions in the key DY projects. We have LPs such as Telefonica, OKX, which is the second largest exchange, and Jump Trading, which is one of the major financial institutions.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm Andrew Fisher. Thanks again for having us. I started off in working crypto startups. I was actually a developer, way early for their time, doing crypto point of sale systems. What moved into IoT, started working for a large corporate IoT company, building full stack mobile applications. And then with the release of Helium, I started a company called Noble Networks, and we are an enterprise deployment company. We deployed, little over 230 Helium devices across Southeast Jersey, and then moved into LTE and wireless as well with the rise of Helium 5G and Pollen Mobile.
Very cool. I mean, Andrew, Alvaro, both incredible backgrounds and very, very much experts in the space. And I like the different perspectives, investor and founder. I guess a good place to sort of start and set the scene for our audience would be what is DY, and why is it important to you guys? Andrew, maybe take it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's a freedom of choice type thing, and also just there's so many different aspects to it, right? That are attractive. This industry in general is a very hard one to jump into. I think for many founders, right? I mean, you have these telco giants that it's kind of gatekept in order to get into this space. So DY kind of opened the door for a lot of people to be able to participate in these networks and build businesses off of them. So I think that was my initial interest, and then just the knowing the shortcomings of the pain points of where a lot of these networks struggle for growth and keeping everything up to date and top of the line. It gives a real area for us to kind of jump in there and take the reins for ourselves somewhat.
Really cool.
For me, DY is a revolution in the way that we can create telco networks. It was proved by Helium that this model works. Helium deployed the largest IoT network globally with almost 1 million antennas deployed around the world. That's something that, in terms of capex and expenses and opex, would be impossible to do on a centralized way by a telco, taking care of so many different jurisdictions all around the world, and so much capex, and then so many locations also. So what DY enables is a way for anyone to deploy networks. All of this is powered by blockchain technology and token incentives. And it's also what Andrew said, right? These users that deploy this hardware are also owners of the network. All this is built on open source software and permissionless networks, which is really important for network neutrality. And for the telcos, it's a great opportunity because it's a new deployment model that they can leverage. Telcos can expand to areas where traditional deployments wouldn't be cost effective, but this model enables them to merge with the community, with anyone that lives anywhere, to expand their networks. So this is why we are looking at this as one of the most strategic developments in the telco industry of the last years.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, we're definitely gonna get. Sorry, please go for it. We're definitely gonna get into how traditional telcos can join and use these networks. But one of the questions we always get, Patrick and I, when we're trying to explain this to people, is they wonder, why are the tokens worth something? We try and tell them that token incentives have allowed people to, like you said, launch over 1 million hotspots globally. But why are these tokens worth something?
So tokens are worth something because they can, I mean, the easiest way to figure this out is as if a telco could pay in equity, in their own equity, to their users to deploy their networks, right? The equity generally has value because of the dividends. In the case of tokens and these networks, the token acts as equity, but not for a company, but for the overall network. And the tokens have value because generally when the consumption side or the users that want to use these networks, when they want to use it, they need to pay in these tokens in order to use these networks. So there's a demand for these tokens from the usage side. In many of the designs of these networks, some part of these tokens are burned, so they cease to exist, therefore reducing the supply of tokens. So there's an equilibrium in the amount of tokens that are created and the amount of tokens that are destroyed that push up the price of these tokens and the valuations of these networks.
Yeah, and I also think you have to also consider the fact that, you know, there's the companies, you know, deploying these networks, they're not actually spending any of that CapEx, right? Like they're offloading that capital expenditure to the deployers that are doing it. So they're getting network coverage for no cost of their own. So as a deployer building on, you know, taking on that burden, you're now, you know, if you can think of it in terms of like investment, right? You're investing in that equipment. That equipment also gives that network value, the coverage that it's providing, the utility that it provides for anyone using it, as well as like your personal investment. I mean, it's very similar if you think of, you know, Bitcoin miners and Ethereum miners. You know, a lot of their value being derived is due to electricity and equipment costs and everything else that's somewhat giving it the value other than its, you know, utility that it's already there. So I think that also kind of adds to that pie.
Got you. And Andrew, we'd love to talk a little bit more about as well around how people are getting involved with these networks. How are people finding out about them, deploying them? I mean, as a deployer yourself, we'd love to hear about sort of what you're seeing in the space as well around user adoption.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. You know, I think it's happened a bit differently with each network. There's there's three that have been really doing well in terms of DUI, was Helium and Helium Mobile, right? And then Pollen Mobile, and now you know, new people are coming into the space, like companies like XNet, right? They all have different deployment strategies. I think a lot of it is the community, right? The community is the one that pushes and drives this stuff. So not only are they getting deployment, but I think it's in the best interest of all deployers to create use cases, right? And create value for their own network, right? If I have a lot of subscribers in my area and I'm able to push that out, you're essentially, you know, decentralizing that that B2B, you know, or B2C, you know, marketing as well. I've seen a lot of it come through community. I got into it just, you know, from being a crypto person and seeing like these different networks come online and deciding to take a gamble, right? And I think now you're starting to see a shift in that on how a lot of these people that deployed it originally are now building services for it on top of these systems, and offering it in unique ways, using them kind of as, you know, I like to liken it to almost like a, you know, communications Legos. Like they're plugging these things into different places and developing new use cases for it, and then using it as a tool to, you know, drive real demand and real value for companies and individuals themselves.
Yeah, and I think this innovation, also building on what Andrew said, comes at a very interesting time where, you know, 5G I think poses a challenge for telcos in the sheer amount of deployments that they need to overtake in order to have full 5G coverage. And I mean 5G, I mean millimeter wave, right? Where the density of antennas, it's expected to be at least 5x of what we already have. So it's with the current models and the current costs of deployments, it would mean massive amounts of capex that have to be invested. And these companies are, in some sense, you know, already with some high debt to revenue ratios. So, I mean, it comes at a time where it's really relevant. And this is a tool for these telcos to be able to crowdsource that capex from these 5G deployments into the community. And when we are talking community, we are talking about companies that deploy these networks, but also individuals. We have both in this space, in the D-Wave space, and also it's a tool for make them participants of this network and make them also get some upside from the growth of these networks in exchange for their work and their investment. So
yeah, and I guess that's a pretty good segue sort of into how people are getting onboarded into the ecosystems themselves. I've heard it's gotten like insanely easy lately, like just being able to scan a QR code and be able to get onboarded into sort of these networks. So we'd love to hear about what you're seeing from the end user side and who seems to be really adopting this technology.
Yeah, from an end user side, I know, in the past, Helium has gotten some flack on not having too many people, sending data over their LoRaWAN network. And I honestly have a completely different viewpoint on that. I think that with most of these technologies, right, you're going to see adoption come as soon as the network is viable for people to use it, right? Helium just completed and created a network that, spans the globe, over 1 million, or I think it's around 900 something thousand, devices onboarded. And now there's coverage that is somewhat usable, right, for the most of the places that they affect. You wouldn't see a Fortune 500 company, you wouldn't see any of these large companies jumping on board to something that is taking a risk and a gamble on something that might not be there, right? And so I think that the value proposition, the long-term adoption of it is going to be something that you're now just starting to see people build services on top of and build things for. So I think that those critiques, although they were valid and there was not much data going through, now is when the time where you're going to see a lot more people starting to adopt it and the data is starting to go through. I know a couple of companies that are going to be using Helium for their services. In terms of like consumer adoption on the LTE side and on the private 5G with Helium, Helium just started their own plan. There hasn't been too much adoption on that side yet. Helium just started their own plan. They have their own mobile plan running with T-Mobile and using it kind of an MVNO type scheme with them, where their radios actually get targeted first, and anywhere there is Helium, it passes data through that first, and then it kind of backhauls off of T-Mobile and uses T-Mobile network when there's none available. In terms of Pollen, I use it every day. I've got it on my phone right now. I have terrible service here at my home.
I was gonna say, how's your coverage?
Yeah, it's pretty decent. I've got it up on my garage in the back. And that's the powerful part about it is, it took me around 2 or 3 minutes to install an eSIM. eSIMs are, it's new. Apple is going all eSIM. Most competitors are starting to support them and bring them on more and more. But, I have this backup internet connection that, when I can't get service from my regular provider, I've got a secondary line there to back up onto. So I think that that's where you're seeing a lot of it. And it just depends on density. I mean, CBRS has its challenges. I think we'll see more and more people as well as more institutional and municipal, use cases with these types of networks. And I think that's where you're going to see the first push of it. But then, down the road, as it gets more network density, you'll see more and more consumers jumping on board.
Totally, and I really like how Andrew put it, because it's very different, the adoption from the IoT, the LoRaWAN Helium network, than from the LTE projects that we are seeing out there. For LoRaWAN, there needed to be built an ecosystem of software and layers of service on top of the Helium network, which is being developed. But let's think about it. 1 year ago, there wasn't a decent LoRaWAN, a decent Helium LoRaWAN network. This has grown very quickly. So the industry needs time also to develop the middleware, the software, and also the devices that are compatible to achieve that mass adoption. But right now, we are convinced about it because it's the cheapest IoT connectivity that you can get anywhere. We are talking somewhere around 9 cents per year for a device that does 4 connections per day, which is more than enough for many use cases for IoT. Let's remember that IoT generally is about low marginal value use cases where each device, each sensor is producing a very, very tiny amount of value. The value comes from massive deployments, right? And so it's unfeasible to pay several dollars per device for their connectivity. So that's why we believe that Helium, LoRaWAN network has a bright future ahead as soon as the hardware and all the other tools are developed, which, by the way, Nova Labs, we know that it's putting a lot of effort with their new unit that they named, I think it's 163. And so they are putting a lot of effort on that. And for the LTE, yeah, I mean, it's already up and running. It has active users and it's growing a lot. With this latest offering from Helium, from Nova Labs, Helium Mobile, it's a first step towards getting a lot of adoption and usage for these antennas. But it's difficult, right? It's something like the chicken and the egg, right? Where you first need to deploy the network for the users to come, but the users won't come if there's no network. There won't be network if there's no users. And the token helps to bootstrap that initial adoption, right? And those initial deployments. So that's what is really interesting about this area.
Yeah, those initial bootstrap, like you said, that is what I think interested most people in this, is because you're taking ownership of that network, right? And you're taking ownership and getting access and exposure to the upside of, you know, if this thing works really, really well, then you're going to benefit as well. And so I think that's where it sets itself apart from other, you know, offerings in the telco space.
Totally.
Alvaro, you mentioned, you know, sort of the different types of networks. And one of the critiques of IoT specifically is like smart cities, and this vision of having sensors everywhere really doesn't exist today. Could you talk to a few use cases that you see coming up for IoT networks specifically?
So there's so many, but I mean, the most widespread right now are vehicle tracking and location, because that's the highest in terms of marginal value, tracking a vehicle. Those ones are already, I mean, there's already NB-IoT connectivity by the main telcos, and for that kind of use case of tracking a vehicle, you're probably able to pay $3 a month, $5 a month. Now, the problem is with these other use cases that are very low marginal value. For example, putting sensors on every trash can of a city in order to know when the trash can is full, and then optimize the route that the truck is going to do in order to pick that up. So it's a case where if you have a sensor that is worth $1 and a battery that will last several years in some cases, right? Mm-hmm. And the connectivity cost is somewhere like around 9 cents per year, then that use case is feasible. And it will bring a lot of value because it will save in gas, it will save in time. So it will optimize the routes. So, I mean, we are starting to explore all these use cases that are very low in marginal value, and the potential is it's almost limitless. We are talking about parking sensors. We are talking about temperature sensors, pollution sensors. So many use cases that are still not available because the economics of IoT weren't there until now.
Yeah, I think, you know, that just from
really?
I was gonna say, just from the crypto side as well, you see other networks starting to build onto these, right? So there's a company in the same space, not necessarily decentralized wireless, but in the whole decentralized infrastructure play itself, that you know, is running a energy company, right? And they're doing a decentralized virtual power plants, right? They're going to be using the Helium network to connect and use all their data. So you're seeing like integrations with other things in the space, utilizing that because it's the cheapest option for them as well.
We just got a question in from the audience. This is exciting. You mentioned a push towards municipal adoption. Have you seen success taking this route? And if so, can you elaborate on a case study? So municipal specifically.
Yeah. So there's one case study, one of our colleagues called Spread Networks. They did this pilot out of Shreveport, Louisiana. In Shreveport, just a little bit of background there, the poverty level is very, very great in Shreveport. It's a very poor city for a lot of the residents that live there. And a lot of them didn't have access to communication, to the internet, to anything. So the city had reached out and tried going with a traditional telecommunications company. And that was going to cost the city around $5 million, right? To have a company come out and deploy these networks and work something. Spread Networks, who's another DY deployer, they came in and deployed some Pollen mobile radios and other, decentralized wireless systems around the city. Did it for a tenth of the price at around $500,000, including all of these, mobile CPE devices, which it's like a mobile hotspot or a Wi-Fi hotspot. And they built a system with the city of Shreveport where any citizen in the city could go to the public library and check out an internet connection for 6 months if they're in the coverage zone. So they did not need anything. The city provided it free. The city owns all of the equipment when it comes to the actual LTE equipment. They signed a contract with the network company to build it. But the city owns the devices. They don't have to worry about, anything else really. And their residents get coverage, right? And so it's this really awesome use case where people that didn't have access to the internet, now they do. And it was just as easy as going to the library and picking up an internet connection.
In terms of other use cases also for this low marginal value IoT connectivity that Helium is providing, some things include from environment monitoring, things like air quality monitoring. There's applications in water quality and usage monitoring, extreme weather conditions monitoring. In terms of the applications that regard smart cities, we have water management and leak detection. All these kind of applications are enabled by the Helium Environment Network. Smart parking management, a lot of applications in smart agriculture where you can do remote environment monitoring of humidity and temperature of the soil. You can do data tracking. You can do asset tracking. You can even track an Amazon package with this kind of very cheap, low-cost connectivity. You can do fleet management, operations optimization, like the example that I just told, pet tracking. So, I mean, the use cases are already, imagined, but not fully, not fully deployed because of the lack of this network up to 1.5 years ago. So that's I think where we are going.
Yeah, and we have a couple of use cases that we've been working on. We've been trying to think outside the box with a lot of the places we're going. So we've talked with a couple of companies, in for instance the mining space, which is it's funny because the Pollen Mobile that's what it was originally. The ideation behind it originally was. Anyways, they were trying to get connectivity out to remote mining locations. But we had spoken with one mine that they spend anywhere between $5,000 and $20,000 a month on their connectivity. Right, like it's great because they need these machines on and they're in a remote position. So what they would spend on that, we could go in for the same $20,000 in an equipment and provide that for them as long as we had a decent internet connection, and they would have an uninterrupted service at a fraction of the cost year round, and they would own the equipment, right? So things like that. Other municipal opportunities we've been going after is places with high traffic from tourism, right? Like there's certain places where we are located over on the Jersey Shore that have maybe 13,000 people year round and 500,000 during the summer, right? That come in, and it absolutely obliterates the connectivity. I can tell you from experience. My connectivity goes to like next to nothing when we're out there. So, those are some of the talks that we've been trying to have with different places. Like, hey, use this as a municipal, taxpayer incentive. Like, give this as a taxpayer service. We'll create a private network here for taxpayers that live here, for residents, so that when these people come, their internet connection isn't completely turned off on their phone. They can have a backup, right? And give that as a public service. So there's many, many different ways that you can, create services around it. It's just a matter of going out there and people understanding it and, educating on how it can work for them.
Really cool. You know, what I gather from what both of you are saying is like, when people critique the fact that hey, these use cases really haven't taken off yet, it's because they weren't possible before, and now they've become possible with, you know, these lower marginal costs, these incentive structures, building it in, you know, unique areas where it just wasn't feasible before. So it's sort of that chicken and egg problem Alvaro mentioned, is we need the time for the demand side to catch up as these networks are now, you know, building up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's, I mean, like I said, going from you know, doing software and then, you know, starting with these small little helium devices, you know, stuck in a window that we everyone started with, is, you know, these, then upgrading it and figuring out, okay, how do we actually, you know, optimize these things to work at their best potential, and then moving into LTE. And it's been a learning curve and a growth curve that's very steep on that side of it. But I think that, you know, most people, most companies, they have no idea, you know, what it actually takes to make one of these networks traditionally. And those, you know, from tower, you know, rentals to, you know, custom equipment, custom, you know, infrastructure just to make the things connect to it. Not to mention the limitations on a lot of those when it comes to these sites that we, you know, normally have, these macro cell sites, and their capabilities, the way that we use data and the amount of data that we use every single year going up exponentially. Those systems aren't going to last forever like that. So there's going to be a need for a new type of, you know, way to deploy. So I see this as kind of the segue into that new paradigm for the telco industry, and creating these, you know, connectivity on, you know, essentially every household if you needed to.
Yeah, I mean, the way we see it, these technologies enabling a lot of competitive advantages compared to the traditional model. The CapEx part that we mentioned before, it's something revolutionary, how CapEx can be crowdsourced with DY. It's also important that there's no labor cost associated to these deployments, since most of the time these deployments are being deployed by individuals in their own premises. There's no maintenance on that hardware, because generally we're talking about consumer grade hardware that has a warranty, and it's a network that is powerful through redundancy, not so much through the power of the individual hardware. There's no real estate cost also, because all these people are placing this hardware on their premises. And then a very important part is the blockchain automation. There's many processes happening in DY networks that in the traditional model are happening through massive billing, accounting, onboarding, and support departments. In the DY model, most of these functions are automatized by the blockchain. Value is flowing from consumers to providers of the connectivity through the blockchain, which has virtually no cost. And that's a big competitive advantage in terms of efficiency of the model. The other positive aspect of DWAY and another competitive advantage is the open access and the global reach. We are building networks that are global. The only key issue right now is the spectrum, but you know, there's potential to build these networks with Wi-Fi 6 or spectrum being shared by telcos. And then it's important also that all of these translates finally into a huge cost advantage because to the consumer. So that's I think something very relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the cost savings are massive. It's like 10x cheaper to utilize decentralized wireless networks compared to traditional telcos. And I think that's a great segue into speaking about sort of what do the current incumbents like AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, what do they see DY as? I mean, obviously they're not asleep to it. They definitely know it's coming, but do they see it as an immediate threat to their market, or do you think that there's any potential for collaboration there?
So I think because I mean we are in touch with many telcos, and from my background, I think their first initial response is to feel threatened by this model. But what we are pushing and what we are trying to make understand is that this is a model that can complement their existing deployments. And it's a model that they can leverage in order to save vast amounts of CapEx, in order to increase and improve the service that they are providing. And, at the end, this is very cheap also for the telcos to integrate with. I mean, the native connectivity from these DY networks is very cheap. And telcos can be just a layer on top of the DY networks to aggregate their users and to basically funnel the connectivity through these networks. So I think it's very complementary. It's maybe more disruptive for companies like American Tower or Cellnex, the infrastructure companies. But I also believe that there's a model in which those companies can also deploy DY networks. So I think that if done with a proper strategy and at the earliest time, it can be very beneficial for any company in the value chain of telco.
Yeah, and just to go back on what Alvaro said right now too is that's what we're seeing. I think with these models you have to think of all those costs associated, and having that's for the DY, that's the holy grail, right? Is having some sort of data aggregation layer where they can offload these any data that they need to onto these networks. From our side, it's so much cheaper for them to do that, right, than to deploy another tower or find another site or dig some more fiber lines under the ground and pay for permitting and construction and everything, where they can just get that connectivity through a crowdsourced model where from a DY deployer standpoint, most of the DY deployers like myself and others, we do it off of a profit split model with wherever we host it. So we have we do the installations, we buy the equipment, people, they donate their property and they say, okay, cool, you can put this here and give us permission, and we give them a percentage of whatever it earns, right? So from our side, we already have our margins set. If it gets used more, it's better, but it gives another way for people to kind of earn on their property, earn on their investment, do a passive stream of an asset that may eventually rise in value, or we also would pay people via regular dollars, right, and just do it that way. So it's a much smaller burden for a company to give coverage than what they would have to go through in order to do the same.
Totally. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I'm also, wondering, and I think both of you will have unique perspectives on this, what right now, like in the space where we're at today, are the most exciting investment, I guess, for you, Alvaro, and, business opportunities for you, Andrew, of how you guys are both going to proceed at, Borderless and at Noble?
So there's already 3 competing networks and protocols, 3 key ones, Helium being the leader and the earliest of these projects, Pollen and XNet coming behind also, but growing a lot. There's probably a space for more, but it wouldn't be optimal. On the other side, these networks are probably very interoperable in the sense that since all of this is done through eSIMs, a user can have several of these subscriptions and pay as they go. So I mean, we don't see so much as a competition. Also in the hardware, so in the supply side of the equation, miners can turn their antennas to mine one network or the other fairly easily, and most of the hardware is intercompatible. So we see this as an ecosystem that is collaborating a lot. In terms of investment opportunities, there's, I think the best investment opportunities are at the application layer, where many use cases are being created and adopted. Andrew is much more knowledgeable than me because he's an entrepreneur in this area and he has a very, very interesting things building. We are also not only looking at DY, but we are also looking at a bit of a wider space that is deeping. So token incentivized infrastructure protocols, which is the same principles of building infrastructure with tokens, But you can also apply this same model to building weather station networks. You can build pollution monitoring networks. You can build all types of physical infrastructure through this model. But DY is our key focus. And yeah, the application layer is still to be developed, and we are closely monitoring that because it's where most of the value will probably be generated.
Yeah, I think from our side, we're so there's challenges that come in being a DY deployer, right? There's things that you have to tackle in terms of tax liabilities and paying people out, and all these logistics that weren't really there. You were kind of starting from zero. So on our side, we've been focusing on building a platform that allows these deployers to automate that entire system and get tax advantages and essentially automate the entire payout process. But in terms of like what I'm looking for in terms of deploying, I'm really interested right now in, like you said, the broader deep in space. There's so many different protocols and networks out there. He was talking about a few of them. There's ones like GeoNet, which is already has data consumption, and the data is being bought, but they monitor space weather, right? And like nobody would really think about, okay, space weather, what am I gonna do with that? But the fact is, with a lot of these different systems, you can put them in the same locations. And so you can maximize the benefit for not only the property owner, but the deployment company as well, because you minimize the amount of operational expenses trying to find new locations. And so stacking all of those different protocols into one, and providing value for multiple networks in one location. And this, the other area that I'm kind of looking in the deep in sector is in the energy markets. There's one company that we've been working closely with in their testing phase called React Energy. And they are amazing at what they're planning on doing, but they're essentially trying to decentralize energy markets and create, blockchain connected IoT, energy devices that is a virtual power plant. You basically sell these batteries. And from a deployer standpoint, it gets me really excited because of the tax benefits with stored energy battery systems, and being able to get the subsidies to pay for a lot of these systems and distribute them with a marginal cost that you normally do with other types of networks at the moment. So that's where I'm excited, and that's where we're going to be focusing on tools to scale these networks, but also deploying other types of networks along our already existing fleet.
Yeah, and briefly, Andrew mentioned a couple of very powerful projects building this ecosystem. By the way, many of these are also using DY connectivity. So it's kind of a stack, right? Where with different layers. Other projects can be, for example, WeatherXM. They are deploying weather stations and creating the largest decentralized weather monitoring network. So people buy these weather stations, they place them at their house, and they earn tokens. In exchange, they are building the best weather data network with the most dense information, and they are selling that to insurance companies, traders, and many corporates that need this very dense information. Other one could be Planet Watch, another very interesting project. It's a pollution monitoring sensor that measures the pollution, and then it pays you in tokens in exchange for purchasing and installing that device. And they are building a map of air quality in the main cities. All these projects have deployed already thousands of sensors, and most of these are using Helium or DY connectivity. So it's really interesting also to see that these deep in projects are already users in many cases of DY connectivity.
One other place, Alvaro, that I totally forgot that we haven't mentioned at all is just on vehicle data and vehicle information. Companies like Demo and HiveMapper. I mean, those two use cases are anyone can do, right? Anyone can participate. Not only do they give value at their core level, but they have ulterior values to the consumer. With HiveMapper, they're creating a decentralized Google Maps service almost. Very just crowdsourced information that will keep up-to-date street level view maps. And then with Demo, I mean, that thing, I've had it on my vehicle for the last year. It tells me things about my car that I never knew. But also they're using this information, crowdsourcing it so that they can enable companies to do, early recalls, right? Insurance companies giving them, information about drivers or driving patterns, or there's so many different things that data can be used for, but people shouldn't be giving that away. It's kind of likening it to the Waze of the world back in the day. Is, when they sold Waze, it was a crowdsourced information. Everybody participated and started saying, hey, there's an accident here, there's this, there's that. But at the end of the day, when it sold for a bunch of, whatever it sold for, everyone got a t-shirt, right? And now it's like, you have these different networks, your data is yours. If you're going to be giving it away, you should be getting something for it. And I think more and more people are starting to catch on to that idea. And so, these types of services enable that for people.
Yeah. I think these last sort of like, this last discussion thread that we were going down about this composability of these different decentralized infrastructure networks is very exciting. And like one of my favorite things about the space at Plug and Play, one of these areas that we didn't touch upon was decentralized storage. We're really interested, like the hardware in that case is not, hotspots, but it's servers. And, the ethos of all of these things in general is just very cool. It's like, we can trust centralized companies or big companies to set price and set accessibility, or we as people can build these networks and these core commodities, things we all use, things we all need ourselves. Very exciting. I want to ask a couple questions that we have flowing in from the audience. And, I'm pretty surprised. These are really well-informed audience members we have here. So I hope you guys are ready for these. One of them is, so this question is about basically the scalability of these networks. Earlier on, when we were talking about the fact that, hey, demand hasn't come yet, she basically asked, hey, when demand comes, are Helium and these other networks actually ready to handle it? Or is it the case that there'll be additional problems?
So I'm going to be brief because Andrew knows more about this, but the way I see it, these networks act because of the redundancy. So these individual antennas are not as powerful as the telco hardware, but because of the redundancy, because it is so cheap to deploy them, they can achieve more scalability at the end. And then everything that is happening at the backhaul, most of these are connected through fiber, and some of these projects are using Magma. Some others are using telco grade core. So it depends on each particular project. But I think the key aspect and the bottleneck here for connectivity are the antennas, and that's what DWA is most advanced in. The rest of the of the chain can be upgraded. It can be made more efficient, and it can be improved. But yeah, the way we see it right now, we would welcome that test, and these networks will be put to test for sure.
Yeah, and I think he hit it on the head with that. I mean, in the early days of Helium, I think we had some issues right in the very beginning, and I think that's what the things that they've addressed today, right? They're moving to a new layer 1 blockchain. They're moving to a new blockchain so that they don't have to rely on building those core pieces, but they can build the support systems, right, for their network, and leave the hard compute information of the blockchain itself to someone else that has had great success in doing it. So in terms of scalability, I think that they've solved a lot of the issues around that. And now, I think in terms of scalability, it's not necessarily scalability on that side, on the consumer side. It's more of a scalability, I think, with deployers, and keep pushing that growth. I've been calling on any developer that is interested in this space, and that's kind of why we've taken the reins on the development side and started building Web3, solutions as well. Is because there's so many challenges for a deployer, right? In managing the logistics of I just putting it in context, one of our colleagues has around 20,000 of these nodes set up, right? Splitting off all of these different, these tokens, right? And then, all the accounting that goes into that, all the man hours that go into that, where those are all things that can be automated on chain, right? And those can be simplified so that there is no, overhead for that. There's code, and if you trust the code, then you trust the output. So those are the types of things I think, from my standpoint, that's exactly why we started building those sort of tools, is because we know those problems. And I think that those types of things will help these networks grow, scale better, because you have deployers that no longer need to worry about these things and can focus on deploying the networks that they want to.
Yeah.
And forgive me, but when I was speaking about the scalability, I was focusing on the telco side of it. But on the blockchain infrastructure side of it, we had tremendous advancements in the last year or so, with proof of stake blockchains, high performance proof of stake blockchains. Their scalability is vast. One of our portfolio companies, Blockjoy, is specialized on this validator as a service infrastructure, and they are specialized on that. And then the other key aspect here is the move to oracles, where some of these networks are taking away from the blockchain all the parts that are not critical and not value, that are not transacting value, like the packets of data and all these kind of transactions. They are taking that off chain, so that only on the blockchain what is happening is the value transactions. The rest can be offloaded to oracles, which are generally just regular servers with some incentive structure built in. So I mean, the crypto ecosystem and the Web3 ecosystem is evolving very quickly, and the scalability since this last cycle, where we saw a lot of bottlenecks, most of those have been already solved in a matter of months. So that's impressive to see how blockchain technology is evolving to support these massive use cases.
Yeah, I will say that I'm very happy to have folks like yourselves actually thinking about these problems, thinking about solutions, solving them. It's exciting. And so I know we're sort of rounding third here. We have a few more minutes. I do want to sneak in one more audience question. Brace yourselves. You mentioned that some of the value is getting access to internet in regions that did not have before. How do you see DY competing with LEO satellites in the future? Also, why are there not more high accuracy positioning networks using decentralized approaches and RTK? So sort of a two-part.
About the second part of the question, GeoNet is one of the projects that Andrew mentioned, and I think they are targeting that specific use case, location accuracy through space weather monitoring. And there's another project called Onokoi, but GeoNet is clearly the leader in this aspect. And then for the first part of the question, sorry, Kavi, can you repeat?
Yeah, definitely. I think the gist of it was really around, will satellites sort
of sorry,
DY expand to places that don't have internet access currently?
Yeah, low Earth orbit satellite connectivity, as Starlink is proving, needs specific hardware. The bandwidth is constrained when you're using a handheld device. So what the thesis is that they are extremely symbiotic, in the sense that with things like, for example, Starlink and DY, you can set up wireless networks anywhere. So you now don't need for a fiber optics backhaul, or you don't need land connectivity to set up 5G or LTE networks. With Starlink plus DY, we can set 5G in the middle of the Sahara Desert. But you need those two parts, because smartphones won't be able to connect and have decent latency and bandwidth from connecting directly to a satellite. So, and we don't see that improving in the next decades. So that's very challenging technically, because of how electromagnetic waves work, right? If you want high bandwidth and low latency, you don't have much reach. So that's the key constraints there.
Yeah, and I think he hit it again on the head with we don't see it as a competitor. I think if anything, it's enabled a lot of these systems. I know many people who have used companies like, one use case is so I was running, I was the grants administrator for the Pollen Mobile Foundation. We were building a grants program over there. And one of the people that had applied for it, he lived out in Hawaii, and there was this cultural reserve that, had children going to it for field trips and everything else, but a lot of these people couldn't do it, especially with COVID. There was no ability to do it, but they had no data connectivity out there at all, like nothing, right? So his solution to that problem was getting some Starlink, right? Getting some Starlink systems and putting 5G out there. And now all those kids, all the people, the instructors, whoever was out there working it, could jump on an iPad and give virtual tours to a lot of these places that couldn't make it, right? And so it's really, like I said, it's a complement to a lot of those things, where you can create these use cases, utilize that technology, but also spread it to the things that everybody has around their house. Whether it's be a computer with a Wi-Fi, or not a Wi-Fi, but an LTE chip in it, or getting a Wi-Fi backhaul that runs off of these networks. Like, there's so many different ways to extend that connectivity from a satellite system like that. And then in terms of like the high accuracy positioning networks, there's another company that we're working with called Foam, and Foam uses LoRaWAN as well, but they create these interesting systems where you can put what they call a foam anchor, and they use these different systems to kind of triangulate and geolocate, and which is just an added benefit to systems like if the global positioning system isn't in line or whatever. So there's many different things that you can do with that.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I mean, the impact that we see this industry having on alleviating so many problems that are currently in the market, especially around connectivity, like around like lowering the cost of reduction. Like, I mean, coverage still isn't good, right? Like, I was in San Francisco just the other day and I was on the phone with my sister and calls were continually being dropped. And so I think the ability for DUI to allow for the sustainable deployment of this sort of network and allow connectivity to reach areas that it couldn't previously. And so we would love to know, and we want to get you guys involved with sort of our angle here at Plug and Play, which is all around corporate adoption. So what's the best way for one of our partners or corporations to start to utilize decentralized wireless and to get connected to the both of you?
Yeah, so I think the clear opportunity right now is for telcos. Telcos can, explore first this area, second, invest, and win. I mean, many of them, Liberty, Deutsche Telekom, and T-Mobile, of course, and Telefonica, they have already invested directly and indirectly in DY. So, I mean, it's a trend. They are first, I think, investing, which is good, and learning. And I think the second stage is, for example, what T-Mobile is already doing by, through the partnership model. And yeah, there's a lot to explore. But I think that there's only, it's only to win for telco customers and for shareholders also in terms of the cost savings of this model. So, and then for contacting me at Alvaro Garcia at Twitter or through email, you guys can provide that. So happy to talk and to expand.
Yeah, and I think in terms of companies want to deploy it, even test cases, things that you might need, having any connectivity issues, or municipalities, there's many different ways that we can utilize these types of networks. So, people, again, they can reach out to me. We'd be happy to talk with anyone about installing and deploying these systems. But you can reach me on Twitter at I am Andrew Fisher, or, again, my email, I think you guys have it. But if not, it's andrew.fisher@noblenetworks.io.
Awesome. And thank you guys so much for your time today. We really appreciate it, and expounding upon this incredibly innovative technology that's leading the crypto industry.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for having us, guys.
Thanks, folks.
Awesome.
Ciao. we'll see you folks another time.
All good.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks, Callie.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Patrick.
Bye, guys.